How do you feel about Joe Rogan and the podcast bros?
Oh, I hate Joe Rogan. He's a piece of...
I miss when Joe Rogan was stupid.
He can go himself, and all of them can.
I think people are waking up to how cringe they are.
I think it's divisive.
How do you feel about Joe Rogan and the podcast bros?
No.
Bro, the receipts are in the bag.
I don't like them.
Joe Rogan started out pretty cool, but then he just became a complete douchebag.
Yeah, Joe Rogan, alpha dudes and incels, and they're misogynistic and oppressive bullshit.
There is no doubt of Joe Rogan's influence on the electorate, and it has also displayed how podcasting is leading the way to be a focal point in our politics. So what I decided to do was ask Chicagoans and many attending Riot Fest in the city how they felt about him and potentially the damage he has done. If you can, please do give this video a thumbs up, share it, and subscribe. It is absolutely free. How do you feel about Joe Rogan and the podcast bros?
Oh, I fucking hate Joe Rogan. He's a piece of shit.
How do you feel about Joe Rogan and the podcast bros currently?
He can go fuck himself, and all of them can.
How do you feel about the Rogan movement and the podcast bros and their influence?
I'm actually from Austin, and so I can tell you that we see him a lot. I'm not a huge fan of it, if I'm being completely honest, but...
Why aren't you a huge fan?
I'm not a huge fan because I think it's divisive. I think that it's also dangerous. Like, Rogan just spits a lot of nonsense without any facts, and then just shuts people up, bullies them when he's, talking to them, and it's not his perspective. So, I don't know. I think we need less of that in the world. We need more listening and less talking.
How do you feel about the influence of the manosphere, the podcast bros, and Joe Rogan?
I think people are waking up to how cringe they are. I think no one with a certain level of education, age, and life experience can really look at them with a serious face.
How do you feel about Joe Rogan and the influence of the podcast bros?
I don't know who is.
Oh. Perfect. How do you feel about the influence of Joe Rogan and the podcast bros?
Unfortunately, one of my best friends got involved with that and started getting to Charlie Kirk. And I had to cut ties because he said I was not sad enough about him being murdered. I regret any violent political actions, of course. That's not how you make an effective change. But I am not going to mourn the loss of a bigot, period. And I had to go non-contact. It was a friend of 12 years, and it hurts. By seeing him drift into the right wing and getting more and more into conspiracy theories, it's terrifying.
Is there a tipping point for you that you noticed for him or her?
He started using more transphobic words, and then from there, it would be weird little conspiracy theory things that he would say, and I'd be like, do you really feel that way? Is that really? And he would brush it off. And then he said he voted for Trump, and I was like, how can you vote for him? Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that, and I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, it's upsetting.
And how do you feel about Joe Rogan and the influence of the podcast bros?
That fella's a loser.
Why?
Bro, the receipts are in the bag. What do I have to say that he hasn't said for himself? Let these people who speak for themselves. People are what they say. And that's the end of the fucking conversation.
How do you feel about Joe Rogan and the podcast bros?
Fuck them too. Joe Rogan started out pretty cool, but then he just became a complete douchebag.
Yeah, how did that happen?
I have no idea. Don't have an answer for that.
How do you feel about Joe Rogan and the influence of the podcast bros?
Oh my gosh, I don't like them. I don't listen to them, to be honest, so I will say I'm a little naive to that. I don't understand it, but I hope that somebody realizes that you don't have to sell out for money, and you can speak your truth and allow your voice to be heard the correct ways. So.
How do you feel about Joe Rogan and the Manosphere podcast bros?
I miss when Joe Rogan was stupid. Like, if you go back in time and be
43. I watched Joe Rogan when he was on sitcoms in America.
Oh,
News radio.
Fear Factor.
No, not Fear Factor. News radio sitcom. Okay, I watched him then. Right. He used to be dumb and ask people questions and ruminate on those questions. He loved it. He would be like, hey, I don't know about blank. I'm going to bring on such and such to tell me about it. And they would tell him about it. He'd like, listen, I don't know. He was more neutral than anything. So I missed that. The thing with the people need to get outside more often. More people need to come.
How do you feel about Joe Rogan, the Manosphere, and the Podcast Bros?
Oh God. That's not a good. People who I don't know. Problematic. I don't. The whole alpha bro, like, it asserting a dominance when you don't really have a leg to stand on in terms of anything, really. You want to have it. Power isn't about asserting it and maintaining a certain position. It's about having, your idea of power is other people submitting to you. Like, you shouldn't have to say, like, oh, I'm an alpha. You don't subscribe to that to yourself. Yeah, fuck Joe Rogan. Fuck alpha dudes and incels and their misogynistic and fucking oppressive bullshit.
How do you feel about Joe Rogan and the Podcast Bros?
No.
How do you feel about the influence of Joe Rogan and the Podcast Bros?
I have a lot to say on that one. I personally know, like, several guys that, like, they get all their news from there and they assume that it's, like, apolitical. Like, they say, like, oh, I don't have politics, I just watch Joe Rogan. And it's just, like, completely warp their perspective on anything, because it's like, if you look up anything he makes as like a definitive statement about, it's like the exact opposite of what he's saying. Right. But yeah, like, so many friends that, like, I've had, like, literally, like, their views are shaped by Joe Rogan and they're convinced that it's apolitical, but it's like, no, he is political. Like, he's a political commentator by who he brings on and everything else. Right. And then it's just like, yeah, it just gives them like a false ego on, like, or idea of themselves and what they understand, because it's just like, yeah, it's just, okay, to put it, like, kind of crudely, it makes dumb guys think they're smart. And it's like, yeah, because that's, like, the reality of it is, it's like, you barely graduated high school, but now you think you understand geopolitics and all that stuff because you watch a podcaster. Right. And so, yeah, that's probably the thing I'm most opinionated about.
And how do you combat all of that with your friends?
It's actually difficult. Like, so I live in Alaska, and so it's, like, when people I don't agree with, it's really struggling, because, like, I'll have what feels like a good conversation about something. And then this is, like, even with, like, older people, not just Joe Rogan, like, they'll come back the next day and it'll be completely different. Like, they've been reprogrammed to, like, what they believe in, and it's just like, yesterday you were receptive because you didn't know what I was talking about. And then some commentator said something and you're now like, oh, I now know this and I believe this. And it's like, but you haven't looked into it or anything. Right. And so, yeah, it just, like, I guess what I do is I focus on, like, the commonalities, because when you actually talk policy with people, like, there is more in common there. It's just, they don't understand that, like, the people that they're supporting don't have any solutions, and they're actually contrary to, like, or contradictory to their own, like, well-being.
How do you feel about Joe Rogan and the influence of the Podcast Bros?
Similar to the rest of the fascist regime that consider themselves Republican. I think he is another face for propaganda, and that's all I'm comfortable with saying that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep.
I appreciate your time. How do you feel about Joe Rogan and the influence of the Podcast Bros?
I just look at my cousins, and some of my cousins I will disagree with, to put it politely, and I don't think I have as, I would have to think on that a bit more, but I think with many podcasts, it can easily reinforce negative thinking. And Joe Rogan, I believe he phrases himself as, like, a neutral take, as in he just wants to learn, and I love that. But I'm under the impression that he does end up catering more towards an audience that's more right-leaning. I'm all for the neutral take on it, but if he's, whether he knows it or not actually neutral, then that defeats the purpose, doesn't it? Yes. So, yeah, that's me.
How do you feel about Joe Rogan and the influence of the Podcast Bros in the Manosphere?
Joe Rogan, oh man, Joe Rogan is like, he doesn't even know what he's doing now.
Amen.
I think, exactly. I think he's backpedaling too, he's realizing how shitty this administration and who he voted for and literally done everything he could to advocate for him.
Right.
He's like now back being like, oh, I didn't vote for this. I didn't do any of that. When in fact, you did know that. It's just not because it's happening to you doesn't mean that it matters. So like, I mean, everything that's especially going on and here, like the families that are ripped out of, you know, these places that are working and actually living here peacefully, it's diabolical. And then on top of that, just like, and that's not even talking how we're supporting basically Israel with how stupid that is. But it's just Joe Rogan, and it sucks because he's like the #1 like podcaster, and he doesn't even know what he's talking about anymore. He's backpedaling and everything like that.
How do you feel about Joe Rogan and the Podcast Bros?
I have no idea. I don't listen to it. Should
That's
I?
fair.
Should
No.
I? Okay, that's what I thought. I was like, I hear Joe Rogan, and I'm like, maybe not. But if somebody hurt him, I would probably listen to it, so I would hate him more.
Okay. How do you feel about Joe Rogan and the influence of the manosphere and the Podcast Bros?
Wait, hold on. Say that one word again. I didn't know that.
How do you feel about the influence of Joe Rogan, the manosphere, and the Podcast Bros?
The manosphere. What is the manosphere?
So the manosphere is the Rogans, the Kiltonys, the Andrew Schultzes of the world, and the influence that they've had on our current state of politics.
Sorry, I thought of a joke right away. I was like, can I
You
get
could
the
say
country
it.
of origin? No, manosphere. I feel like it's the first line of defense of free speech, and other people are starting to see it now, and so we're starting to accept the fact that it's being taken away from us right now. Do I agree with everything said? No. Do I agree with a lot of it? Maybe, maybe not. But it's not up to me. It's up to like people to decide. You know what I mean?
Well, I think it is up to you. I actually disagree with that. I think that everybody should be using their platform right now if they believe in the First Amendment and saying that there could be an overreach by either a government entity or a person if they're firing an employee, etc. So I actually think it's on everybody.
It's not a could be. It is happening. There's always a grip. Whether you know it's happening under the veil of freedom, or you don't know, it doesn't matter. It's any nation is controlled by the power at be. That's how it's been since the serfs took over all of the land. You know what I mean? The political system in India is still held that way. I don't know what the name of it is off the top of my head, but there's always the bottom and there's always the top, and we're going to be controlled and marketed back to movies and TV shows marketed to a certain way.
How do you feel about the Podcast Bros and Joe Rogan and their influence?
I really have nothing to say to that. I'm Canadian. I don't listen to them. We have our own shit at home.
With the Podcast Bros and Joe Rogan, how do you feel about all of them?
I as well don't really listen to them, but I just think they're setting a terrible example of what masculinity should look like, and especially like young boys in like middle school, high school, like they watch these podcasts and think that this mentality is like what it means to be a man, and it's toxic masculinity, and fuck them.